Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's conversation that we're going to be having with Phil Spade, my guest this week. Very excited to have you on the show, Phil. And just a little bit about our guest before we jump into his grief and loss story. Phil his professional life is really working with and investing with small startup companies to help them grow. And most recently, he is involved with a new company called Swell, which is, what would you call it? A social media app that helps people to launch. I like what you said, micro podcasts, which I think is kind of cool. And his deep passion is he is involved with horse racing, but you don't race horses.
No, I don't get on them. I just own them and just pay the bills. I think
Yeah.
that's about what I do.
Phil, I really do want to thank you for taking your time. I know that you're a very busy human being and you split your time between Dallas and Minneapolis, and you have kind of a unique story we're going to be looking at today where you've had to live with some vision loss. And we're also going to be talking about the loss of your father and how you have dealt with both of those pretty significant losses in your life. So I would like to first start with your eyesight, because I know that you and I had an opportunity to talk a few minutes before we started recording, and that you now have only 5% vision in your right eye. So can we start there before we start talking about your dad and what was going on with your eyesight, when it happened, and where you are now and how you dealt with that loss?
Yeah. So about 2018, or it was 2019, I started realizing that my peripheral vision in my right eye was leaving me. I wasn't able to really see anything out of the corner of my eye. And, your brain kind of tricks you into saying, hey, it's okay. And I really didn't think anything was wrong. And it was this freak thing that I didn't pay too much attention to until I was having a conversation with my father. And, he really encouraged me that I needed to get it checked out immediately. So I did, and we ended up doing an MRI. And what that found was that there was a meningioma, which is technically a brain tumor, but it's not. They call it a tumor because it's the same. The way that you get it out is really the same as a tumor. But what was happening was the meningioma was pressing against my optic nerve. And they said that it's not something that's going to go away, and your eyesight's only going to get worse in one eye. And if we don't get it, then eventually it'll be both eyes. So made an appointment to get the surgery. And at first, it was going to be a nasalectomy. And I wanted to get a second opinion. And I went down to the Mayo Clinic, and they had suggested a craniotomy. And that was important because after surgery, and surgery was very successful, the doctor actually said if we had gone through the nose, it would have been a disaster. And I just stopped him and I said, I don't want to know what your definition of a disaster is. I am only thankful that we made the right choice. So, it was important to me that I always tell that to people, never be afraid to get a second opinion, because I think that second opinion potentially saved my life. So I'm very thankful for that. But I did want to just take a minute to, it was about 3 months when I actually knew that I needed surgery, brain surgery, that is, and when I actually had the surgery. That was really 3 months of preparation. And I did a lot of yoga, I did acupuncture, I spent a lot of time at church, and really just kind of completely cut out any kind of alcohol and really kind of improved my diet, got in shape, did a lot of breathing exercises with that yoga, and really felt very good going into the surgery, and listened to a lot of adaptation and positive thinking things going into that surgery. But it was a very scary time. And I think my father was scared. And my mom's telling me as we go through this journey, and he was very scared because I'd never been through anything like that before. But, I took that 3 months and really prepared myself and felt very good. And that's something that, I try to continue in dealing with this. But after I lost the eyesight, it was a real challenge to just put a key in a keyhole. Your depth perception is way off. I tried playing tennis with my daughter, and it was just an absolute no-go. I just couldn't see the ball at all. So I really struggled with the first month or two for sure.
And I want to talk about those struggles in a moment, but I want to go back because I think that what you're saying is really important for our listeners to hear. You prepared mentally and
Mhm.
spiritually for
Mhm.
your surgery. This could be a very new concept for people because what we do know, and we know this through research now too, is that our mental preparation really does have an impact and can have an impact on how surgery goes, but also on the healing. So, can you talk
Mhm.
to us a little bit
Yeah.
about this? I mean, who told you to start going to yoga and prayer? Were you into that stuff before? Like, I'd love for you to delve a little bit more deeply into this
Yeah.
preparation for the surgery.
I had been doing yoga for quite a bit and acupuncture. I was introduced to that. I was taking a statin to battle high cholesterol, and that statin really tightened my muscles, and we couldn't figure out what it was at first. And so to get those muscles untightened, I did a lot of yoga and I got into acupuncture, and that really made a difference. And with acupuncture, for sure, I can't explain how it works or why it works, but it works for me.
Can you
And
just explain just a little bit? There could be listeners out there where acupuncture is not something that they know what it is. So, can you talk a little bit about acupuncture just briefly?
yeah, I mean, it's centuries old Chinese medicine. And when I do it, the acupuncturist will take a look at my tongue and take my pulse. And then she'll put in needles throughout my body according to what needs to be moved around. And so you'll get maybe 20 needles, maybe a little bit more, that are put into various points in your body. And then they'll leave the room. And for about 20 minutes, for me, it's an overwhelming sense of relaxation. And after that 15, 20 minutes that I'm in the room and takes the needles out, I can tell that my voice is deeper. Like everything is just much more relaxed all around me. And it's a unique feel that I really can't explain too well, but it's just an overwhelming sense of relaxation.
And so, for those of you where you're thinking little needles, they're little tiny baby needles. They're not very big,
Yes.
and they're placed on your body and releasing energy and things like that. And as Phil said, it's a millions of years old, and you can look it up, and we'll have a
Yeah.
link in the show notes for those of you who want to read more about acupuncture. So, thank you for that. So,
Yeah.
continue, please.
So I was into a lot of these things, but not on a consistent basis, I would say. And then part of the reason that I was doing yoga, and I was doing restorative yoga too. And restorative yoga is, you're holding one position for a very long time, as opposed to flowing through the yoga and doing something that's a little bit more strenuous. The restorative yoga I wanted to do because in recovery, I knew if I could use my breath to really concentrate, then I should be able to take my mind off of the pain. So I was really doing a lot of this yoga so that I would be better equipped to recover better. So that was really a lot of what that motivation was, where I said I wanted to be a good patient. I want to have the doctor say, oh, this was the easiest person to work on. And, you control that by lowering your blood pressure and your standing heart rate. I was down in the 50s and I was really in good shape. And, just the flexibility that yoga offers, I knew I wouldn't be able to bend over because you have your surgery on the brain and they don't want you to create any kind of pressure. So I can't really bend past my waist. So yoga really helped me in that, I strengthened my leg muscles so that I could just raise down and then pick something up and not have to bend over. So there was all sorts of things that I did prior it was all just around being able to recover a lot better.
So, let me ask you something in your recovery. You said that you now have 5% of your sight in your
Yeah.
right eye. Going into this surgery, because it sounds like it was a couple of things. If you didn't do anything, the tumor would have continued to grow and you would have
Correct.
gone blind. And also, obviously, getting brain surgery is super risky and lots of things could have gone wrong in brain surgery.
Yeah.
So my question is, did you know prior to surgery that you would probably lose most of the sight in that right eye?
I knew it was a possibility. I thought that, whatever was gone, I thought would be gone for good. And my eyesight was getting worse. We knew, I mean, that was the thing is I'm trying to get back into the mindset of where I was. I really didn't know anything and just had no clue of what was going to happen. I didn't know if something goes wrong. I didn't know whether I would be slower. Would I have some sort of brain injury? I didn't know if I would have sight in my eye or not. So, I mean, going into it, it was scary because I just didn't know what the end result would be. But definitely losing the sight was high up there. And a lot of the times I was trying to convince myself that I'm just going to assume that I'm going to completely lose all sight in that eye.
And so now we know that, you and I talked prior to this, and that, now with the sight, just my mom, prior to her death, my mother had a stroke and lived with that for 12 and a half years before she died. And she had something called a right field cut. And so my mother, it was like that side of her world didn't exist. But that's the brain injury. For you, that side of the world exists, but you said you run into things, you'll run into people, you'll run into,
Yeah.
but you know that you've got the eye loss and that side of your world exists. So tell us, you said your depth perception has been impacted, you're running
Mhm.
into things. What has this experience, sorry, sometimes this sounds a little fluffy, but I always ask what the gift is in the tragedy. What surprises or what gifts or have come as a result of this experience that you've been through? First, the fear, just the sheer terror of going into the
Mhm.
surgery, and now living with the eye loss.
Yeah, and the first couple of months were probably the hardest because it was really, I was running into doorways and it's just not something that you can really get used to right away. It just takes time. I did know somebody else in my circle of friends who had lost their eyesight at age 25 in a motorcycle accident. And he really helped me through some tricks that you can try to help with the depth perception, moving your body back and forth. He really did help. But I have to admit that there'd be times where I'd go out running, and about halfway through the run, I was just like, all right, I'm tired of being blind in one eye. I want that sight back. And I remember just a couple of times on a run specifically that I was just, I'd had enough. I just didn't want to be blind in that right eye anymore. And it was really tough, but I've come through it. I've learned to accept it. I don't think I really wanted to accept it. And every time that I get that why me, I'd think of so many other people in worse situations. And if, losing 90% of my eyesight is the worst thing that happened to me, then I'm still a pretty lucky person.
And what has been impacted as a result of your eye loss? Has it impacted driving? Can you still drive a car? You talked about tennis.
Yeah.
Have you learned to compensate to be able to play tennis? Like, what limitations have come as a result that you've also had to learn to live with?
Yeah, I try to drive as little as possible because I technically can, but there are things I could miss. And if I'm taking a left turn, you certainly don't want to miss the oncoming traffic from the right. I've really tried to limit my driving. I've learned to actually hit a tennis ball back and pickleball back. So I'm getting better there. It just really needed to focus there. But the one thing, the gift in this all, because I know you mentioned the gift is really, they say when you lose one sense that the other senses kind of pick up. And I really can't put my finger on exactly what it is, but I just seem to understand things better. I see the world a little bit clearer now. And I'm talking about when I look at businesses and I try to assess whether they're going to make money or not, I'm able to kind of root out the noise and root out and really focus on what I need to be focused on. And I've made some decisions whether to invest or not to invest based on this kind of intuition. And I have to say that it had to do something with the loss of my sight. I became a better business person. And it was just, losing your eyesight made me see things clearer. And it just, kind of indescribable, but definitely something that was a gift that came out of it.
God, that is so beautiful. I wrote down being able to see beyond what you can't see, right?
Yeah,
Sort of like that
exactly.
third eye. And I wonder too if it's that intuition, that deep intuition that we all have. And sometimes I think we swat it away, or we don't train ourselves to listen more deeply. And I wonder if yoga helped with that too, and the
Mhm.
acupuncture and some of these other things that you did to prepare yourself and to work through that fear for the surgery as well. And I'm sort of thinking about that because I think all of those things bring us deeper into that intuition or our higher self, or whatever language you want to put around it, that can see much more deeply than our eyes. I don't know how you feel about that, if that's resonating with you at all, but that's what I was thinking as
Yeah,
you were
no,
talking.
absolutely.
So let's move now to your dad, because you said your dad was alive when you were going through all of these things with your eyesight. I got that sense that you were very close to your father. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. He was an absolute great man. And he had had a stroke a few years ago, I think probably 10 or 15 years ago. And his speech was a little bit affected, but he really got it back. And, he also had issues hearing. So for the past couple of years, we talked occasionally on the phone, but I could tell he really couldn't hear a lot of the times. And he'd ask to repeat, and then you could tell that he really just couldn't hear you. And so it was difficult to communicate over the phone. So try to make as many visits as possible and emailed a lot. But I also thought he spent way too much time on his computer. So I tried not to send too many emails and try to get him off of the computer there.
So tell us, your father is the one who encouraged you to go seek help for your eye.
Yeah.
So in this process of this 3 months prior to surgery and then post-surgery, where was your father in this whole scenario, and when did your father pass? And was it sudden? So help us to understand sort of this flow of the time of your diagnosis to your dad's death.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed in 2019 and then had surgery in 2019. And, my dad was there to, he loved that I was getting second opinions. And they have a neighbor who actually was a neurologist. And so he was asking him questions and then coming back. And so he was very involved in what we wanted to do and just helping me make some choices through that process. And then it was another couple of years. And then it was February of this year of 2022 that my dad passed away, and he was swimming, something that he did 5 times a week religiously for most of his adult life here. And he was swimming and had some chest pains, and they came with the ambulance there, and he had an aortic rupture. And so the doctors said that, even if he was on the operating table at the time, there would have been nothing that they could have done. So he went suddenly, which my mom and I have talked about being a blessing. I don't know that we would have been able to really handle a long, drawn out sickness. And we just didn't want to see him deteriorate like that. And he had poor eyesight, he had poor vision, poor hearing. And, that was enough for us. He went out doing something that he loved. And sometimes we just we're thankful that it was very quick.
So what was that experience like for you after the death of your dad? You can take a moment. You're going to make me cry too. I always cry during these.
It's just sometimes there's triggers that it's just my mom called that morning, and she's like, he's gone. And I just cried and cried, and I just could not stop crying because I just knew what had happened. And my mom was just very matter of fact. And, I booked the soonest flight I could, packed bags, and was on my way. It really was nothing like I'd experienced before. My uncle passed 3 years prior. That was his brother. And of course I had, all my grandparents die, but this was unlike any kind of pain that I experienced. And it was really the first time somebody had passed away that was really, really close to me. It was tough. It just hit like a ton of bricks.
And it hasn't even been a year, right? This just happened last
Yeah,
February.
correct.
So this is a pretty new loss for you.
Yeah, it is. And, through chance, I connected with this person through Twitter who lost his dad about the same time, and we've just bonded and checked in on each other, and we're experiencing the same things, and it's so therapeutic, and it's so great to have somebody going through exactly what you're going through. And he'll say, just like what happened to me, I just kind of, something triggered something and I start crying. It's happening to him as well. And I've just talked to a few people that have lost their parents, and you find that everybody really has a difficult time with it. And the one thing I keep on reminding myself is that I'm really lucky to have such a great dad to miss. It just doesn't make it any easier.
It doesn't. And, I think that I lost my brother, and that was the most profound loss I've ever experienced in my life. But when we lose our parents, I think about our parents, they're the ones that kind of keep us tethered to the earth and grounded in this way. When you start to lose your parents, I've talked to so many friends because I'm at that age now where I've got friends who have lost both parents. I know that your mom is still alive and my dad is still alive. And I'm going to get emotional too. I often think about, gosh, when my dad leaves, because I feel like there's nobody who will ever love you as much as your parents. Like even if I'm flying somewhere, like my dad will see when my flight is landing. But there is something that is so indescribable about, even my mom died 3 years ago and I miss her every single day. In fact, you probably feel like this all the time because it's still so early for you, but I still, after 3 years, will think, oh, I can't wait to tell mom. And
Yeah.
and we go to pick up the phone to have that conversation and they're not there. And
Yeah.
when you talk about it being a blessing, I think you can know in your mind that it's a blessing when they go quickly and they're not suffering and still have profound grief and sadness over them not being here anymore. And I think it's reconciling sometimes those two feelings at the same time, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah. No, it does. Absolutely.
So you said that you found somebody on Twitter. How? Were you looking for people who were dealing with grief and
No,
loss?
no, it was, there's a community that they call horse racing Twitter. And that's one of the main reasons I was on that. And especially through COVID, I used to go to either Canterbury Park or Lone Star Park. And that's where you find people that are also into horse racing. Well, when COVID struck, there was no OTB or no tracks to actually go to. So everybody just kind of found each other on horse racing Twitter. And I had known him through talking about horses. And all of a sudden, he posted one about a week after my dad had passed. And he just said, I lost my dad today and I'm just having a really tough day. And I just reached out to him and I said, yeah, it was last week for me. And then we started talking and it was like we felt the exact same way about our dads. And we're really just having a tough time with it. And that's when we kind of took it into the direct tweeting to each other and then just kind of still checking in on each other at least one to three times a week.
That's amazing. For me, that's another one of those gifts, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And, I hate to genderize, but I'm going to a little bit because the one thing that I have learned through my years of grief and loss work is that oftentimes men can grieve differently. Their grieving process can look different from women. Like one good example that I've read from men who talk about their grieving process is that sometimes they're not really the group type. They don't want to sit around in a group at a grief and loss group and talk about
Yeah,
their feelings. They'd rather do things, whether it's chopping wood or going to the horse
yeah.
races or whatever it is, that it's more acting through those deep feelings of profound loss. I'm curious because you two found each other, which I think is amazing, and that you have each other to check in. Can you talk just maybe? I'm trying to formulate the question as I'm feeling it, but what it's been like for you. I mean, I don't know if you were an emotional human being or if it was easy to show your emotions before your dad passed, but what has happened around you being able to process this grief? I know you've got this friend you talk to. What other things have you done to help yourself work through this profound loss in your life?
I think talking about it one on one has been, I've just had some great conversations with people that have made me feel so much better about it. But it's people that I know that have been through that experience, and it's people that I really like and trust. And those conversations have just been great. The members of my church were sending me things to read on grief. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of support. And it almost felt like, hey, you're in this club now and we're going to take care of you. And that's what it felt like. It was just something that opened up a new way of talking to people. And, I just let my emotions go. And I know you asked about that. And it's with people that I trust, I've always been open with my emotions, but, it is difficult to kind of crack the nut here. And when my dad passed, it was just like, I just didn't care. I didn't care. I was just hurting so much that if I just started crying, I really didn't care who saw me. It was just, I was past like worrying about anything like that. And I think that was the first time in my life where I just did not care. Didn't care if I just opened up crying. And I did at the airport plenty of times. And it was amazing to see people's reactions because a lot of people were just very, very supportive.
I think that, I always say this, that after my brother died, the tolerance for BS goes way down. It just
Yeah.
plummets, right? Because everything is stripped away. And at our core, we are human beings and we are here to love each other and be together and have connection. And I think that when we see people hurting or when we come together in this knowing and understanding when we've lost somebody, there really is nothing but realness, right? I mean, that's all there is. We cannot take away someone's pain, but the one easy thing we can do is just sit in it with somebody. Listen, maybe not, and even if nobody talks, just to bear witness and hold space. We talk about this a lot in the podcast where people feel so lost as to what to do when somebody in their life has lost somebody. And sometimes it really is just the power of presence, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I had so many friends that just traveled just to be with me and didn't really have to say any words. And that was nice. It was really nice. But you're right. Presence is just, I was so thankful to have them in my presence. And I can't even think about any conversations that we had. It was the presence. You're right.
Yeah, and it's sort of counterintuitive because I remember when my brother died, I didn't want to see anybody, and yet I didn't want to be
Mhm.
alone. And so when people are like, "What can we do for you?" You don't know. In that darkness, you have no idea what you need, who you are, how you feel.
Yeah.
It's such a lost feeling. And so my friends didn't listen to me, thank God. And they just, I'm gonna cry. They just came. They just came
Yeah.
and they were with me and they brought food. I couldn't eat, but it didn't matter because,
Yeah.
food creates community. And I just can never stress it enough on this podcast that it just be. That's all you have to do is just be in that darkness because just their presence brings this light that can just make us feel not so desperately alone in our pain. I wanted to ask you another question because I just keep thinking about the preparation that you did prior to your surgery. And are you, after your dad's passing, have you continued to practice yoga? Have these different things continued to help you in the grief over your dad?
Yeah, I haven't been doing as much yoga lately, and when I have been doing it, I've been doing it on my own. And before I was going to classes, and COVID really kind of put a crimp on that, and I just trailed off on that. But I am still exercising and still doing a lot of the things that I was doing pre-surgery, and need to make another acupuncture appointment. I've kind of gone away from that, so I'm not doing those things as consistently as I did prior to that. But I wish I had. I wish I had though.
Well, you're still very early in grief, and both of those things can be so helpful. It's all about moving energy. That's what I talk about when we're in our pain, it's moving it. Because I'll know even today when I'm doing yoga or I'm working out, I will just start to cry. And it's not even a trigger. It's not even as though I was thinking something sad or about my mom or anything. It's energy that is moving that sometimes you don't even know it's there. And I'm saying that for our listeners as well, because I think the other thing that happens in our grief that's also counterintuitive is moving the body, because what we want to do really, I think we're so exhausted from being sad and crying, and that really, I think sometimes we don't feel like doing anything at all. And
Mhm.
that forcing ourselves to do the basics, exercise, eating, and making sure that we are drinking water, people. Water, that all of those things can help. It doesn't, I don't think it, speeds up time, but it allows those emotions, those heavy emotions to move through us so that they don't become, that it doesn't paralyze or debilitate us. So I'd love to just ask a few more questions before we come to a close. What other things have you done to help you through the grief of your dad? You said that you still exercise, you touch base with
Yeah.
this person on Twitter. What about your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, that I stayed there for about a month after my dad's passing. And I was really there to just kind of help her out because, they had been married, gosh, it was over 50 years. And, they were just, they had their own roles that they played. She cooked and I asked her to turn down the thermostat turn the air down. And she didn't know how to do it because that was what my dad did. And she had just knew that part of her life is covered because that's what he's going to do. So it was a shock for her, and I had to pick up that piece and really start to teach her and everything that he used to do, sending emails, getting her set up on any sort of website. He always did that, so I had to take a couple of weeks to kind of walk her through on how these things were done, how to turn the air down and off, and she was very thankful. And then we had to do, of course, all the paperwork that goes with somebody passing there. So I really got to spend a lot of time with her during that month. And we've always been close and always been close. But I mean, I think that we were just a little bit closer, really kind of sharing old stories and sharing how we actually feel about his passing. And, just had a lot of really deep, great conversations.
Yeah, I think the forgotten population are the widows and widowers of the elderly population. Their life becomes so lonely after they lose a spouse. And typically depending on their age and their mobility and any other issues they have, it's harder for them to get out and about and socialize. And of course, we have COVID. So I appreciate you bringing that up around your mom and staying there. And because I just remember what it was like for my father too, and still is. And your dad didn't die of a slow illness. It was very fast, right? So all of a sudden he
Yeah.
was there 1 minute and gone the next. And that can just be such a very difficult thing for the surviving spouse and what to do. Because like you said, they've been married longer than they've been apart. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's crazy to think about what does life look like after. I have one more other question. I don't think I asked you this prior to recording, but do you have a siblings?
Yes, my brother is 7 years older than me, and he's out in Seattle. And he came in the same night. He came in later and met us at my mom's house.
And so is that helpful? Like, do you and your sibling, do you guys ever talk? Because I know sometimes it can be a weird thing with siblings and I know in my own family, to talk about my brother just made it so real. And we actually didn't talk about my brother for a long time, which I thought was
Mhm.
just, it was hard. It was very painful, but it also made it so very real, this hole in our family after he died.
Yeah, and my brother and I don't talk all that much even before his death. And most of the conversations we have are the logistical questions. Hey, what do you want to do with dad's books? What do you want to do with dad's shirts? And it's just a very kind of tactical conversation about how do we help mom, and really doesn't go beyond that much.
Yeah, and of course, after a death of a parent or a sibling, it really does depend on what those relationships and how tight they were before, because it changes a family. It changes the way people
Yeah.
interact. It changes almost everything. Because I know after my mother died, I come from a very large Italian Catholic family, and we used to get together when the wind would blow, because that was so important to my mom. And after her death, we almost never get together anymore, as a group of siblings. And I really miss that. So I think that, when I think about grief and loss after somebody dies in a family, it's not just the person. I think that there's a lot of different kinds of losses after we lose someone in our nuclear family. So I was just curious as to how that impacted your relationship with your brother. we are coming to the end of our conversation. And do you have social media where people can find you, or is that not something that you engage in?
I really, I do it on Swell. The Swell app is one of the businesses that I started, and I'm at Phil on Swell, and that's where I kind of do a daily Swell that I've monikered, and that's just kind of picking one subject that could really be a good conversation starter. And I'm on there every day, and I find that audio, much of your podcast, is just my preferred method of social media.
Now, can people leave comments? I don't know anything about Swell, but you know that I'm going to
Yeah.
look it up as soon as I get off this call
Yeah,
with
no,
you.
it's all asynchronous. So you just, you can reply, people can reply to you with their own voice. So it is
Okay.
just like a conversation that, like you're on a walkie-talkie and anybody can chime in.
All right. So it's just an app you download. I have listeners out there that probably think that I'm so dated that I do not know what Swell is, but is it relatively new?
It is. Yes. Yes. We just launched at South by Southwest and, just building it slowly but surely here.
Okay, I can't wait to check it out. Is there anything else you want to say to listeners before I have one last question that I ask everybody on this podcast, but is there anything else you would like to say to listeners before I end with my question?
I would just encourage people both in tying both of these losses together. Prior to surgery, I didn't want to talk about it. I just didn't I was scared and I really didn't want to talk about it. And after the surgery, I didn't mind talking about it at all. And I came across a neighbor who I learned had actually had a nasolectomy and a craniotomy to get rid of the same exact thing that I had. And that would have been so helpful going in that I really regretted not sharing that. And because of that, I've been much more open. And then in the grief with my father, I was just much more open and to have conversations. And it's been just so helpful. So whenever we're talking about grief, it's so easy to just bottle it up and not say anything. But if you fight past that, it just gets so rewarding when you actually connect with somebody and you just never know what that experience and how their experience can start helping you. So I just would highly recommend people just share your thoughts, share your feelings. Don't worry about the BS on how it comes across. It's just been so helpful in my life.
Well, and as a therapist, I appreciate that plug.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, here's my last question to sort of wrap this up. Is what does self-love look like for you now after this terrifying experience you've gone through with brain surgery and then of course most recently losing your dad? What does it mean to you now?
Losing your dad, I think the sense of mortality of our own fate starts weighing on my mind a little bit more. And just taking that time to just kind of reflect, I just need that alone time. And I don't know that too much has changed about how I kind of approach that, but I think it was probably, in preparation of surgery, it just all the BS was really gone. I didn't care about anything but making sure that I was healthy. And I guess that's how I would define it right now is just being the healthiest person I can be. And I probably need to get into the gym here and do that. But I would say that's how I define it right now.
That's great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life to be here with us today. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And we'll see you guys next week. Love to you all. Bye for now.